Good morning, everyone. So good to have all of you with us for this last full day of our conference. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our final plenum speaker for this conference. Dr. Alisha Lola Jones is a professor of ethnomusicology in the Department of Music and Ethnomusicology and Folklore at Indiana University's Jacobs School of Music. She comes with a great background in theology, in music, in ministry, in so many related fields that allow her to do work that really cuts across disciplines to offer us fresh insights into our conference theme, rather, the song, the singer, and the singing. We will be taking comments in the chat box this morning. If you would like to make some or ask questions, we'll be monitoring those. So hopefully there will be some time at the end for you to hear some answers to your questions. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Alisha Lola Jones.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, Mr. McMahon. I appreciate the introduction. And in Black church fashion, if you would just let me know that you hear me by saying, praise the Lord, or typing praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
I love it. I love it. The voice of God. Oh, that is so inspiring. Do you all see this? I love it. Praise the Lord. That is one of the calls and response in kind. I'm so happy. Oh, and I see such a diverse and international crowd. This is a blessing. I am so excited to join you all. Good friends with many of the members of the Hymn Society. Thank you so much to Mr. Brian Henn and to Dr. Cynthia Wilson. And what a treat to be led in prayer by one of my former students, Felicia Patton. I'm so happy to be surrounded by friends and family this morning. Well, I've been praying about this time with you all, that it would be relevant, especially given our current climate. And I hope that as we spend time together in this final day of the Hymn Society Conference, which has been so well orchestrated, that you will engage me through the chat function of this Zoom platform. So please feel free, and I encourage my colleagues to observe the chat with me, just to make sure that we catch any of your questions. So today I want to focus on just worship. And the interesting thing about this topic and the title that I chose for today is that for about 2 years, I've been lecturing on this. I even taught a course at Johnson C. Smith Theological Seminary, and a online course, one of my first online courses through a seminary. And before we entered 2020, there was already a sense that we needed to be more ethical in our worship. Now, for many people, when we say just and justice in our worship, there might be an immediate sense of the legality that we might address through worship, ethical behavior that is promoted through the messages in our worship. And yes, that is a part of what I mean by just worship. However, now that I have the opportunity to address the Hymn Society, I want to talk a little bit about the aesthetics that support just worship, the ideas of what we find beautiful, and how that undergirds or bolsters our practice of justice as we join together liturgically. How does that sound for you all? The aesthetics and how the way we understand beauty, even in our practices of hymnody, how that can reinforce ideas of ethical behavior, as well as performance practice. As you can imagine, as a scholar of musics of the world, global pop music, religious musics of the world, and in particular, musics of the African diaspora, I'm always asked, how can I learn how to participate in musics that were generated by the Black church tradition? Well, this is a foundational lecture in an intercultural and interracial setting. So I would like to share with you my screen. And if I could get the sharing function enabled on this particular account.
Done, sorry.
No problem, no problem. All right, so I'm going to share with you my my keynote slide show, and we're going to do a little bit of listening. I do like to get feedback. I was raised in a Pentecostal church, so the more you talk back to me, the more encouraged I am, okay? So please do feel free to communicate, hopefully in the affirmative, and I will do my best to respond to you. Great, great. So, just worship, exploring the sound of justice and gathering people through song. I want to start off by talking about decolonizing worship, then worship and social justice, setting the atmosphere, and if all goes well, we can talk about justice for musicians, Decolonizing worship. So the context for this portion as we think of just worship is that with all that has been going on socio-politically in the world, music ministers and Black churches have been gathering to think about the ways in which our worship has been colonized. For example, there was a really popular stream last week by major music ministers who are affiliated with the full gospel tradition. You can find this on Facebook. It was streamed through Facebook, and they were addressing what are the ways in which our worship has been colonized. And they started talking about the musics that they have adopted with their understanding that this is the sound or the style, the genre, or approach to worship for the world. It's an interesting school of thought, but there were many who have been led to believe that there's a particular vein, there's a particular sound and genre that they must ascribe to in order to be palatable, in order to be widely distributed. And here I've listed some of the styles and labels, record labels that folks have actually understood as formulaic approaches to music, and their musics function as hymns for many of these worship leaders that are in these conversations about decolonizing worship. Christian contemporary music, Hillsong, Gateway, Integrity, Maranatha, Tizay, Iona. These are musical styles that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And yet they have felt as though, or they expressed in some of these live streams, particularly the one for the Full Gospel Convention last week, that if they veer away from these sorts of styles in this modern moment, that they may not get airplay. Now, I see someone who is mentioning Pacifica culture, autoria. It's been a long time since I've said that particular culture, but yes, I see you. So there is this idea that there are styles and labels and formulas that people are to ascribe to, and the function of these songs, even the songs from my youth, Maranatha, Integrity music, are treated as though they are hymns because they are in songbooks and they're part of a written tradition. What is at play here is the idea of our worship as commodity. Our worship as commodity. What do I mean by that? The ways in which, whether it is through the hymnal, the purchasing of hymnals for sale, or the purchasing of recordings of various songs from our traditions. We as people interdenominationally or trans-denominationally gathered, we're part of a modern tradition where our musics are being placed up for sale and purchased, whether it's sheet music or recordings. And for folks who are trying to make a livelihood, their engagement as African Americans often is funneled through these sorts of labels. Now we have folks who are a part of the Hymn Society who are denominationally connected and have the denominational hymns that they are able to be a part of consulting on. I've worked with the Methodist Church by invitation of Dr. Cynthia Wilson, and other publications. There's a variety, but the most recent conversations have incorporated these labels. So, as we think about decolonizing worship, again, in an interracial, intercultural context, we have to first decipher what interracial and intercultural is. Okay, I do a lot of participant observation, and I visit churches that describe themselves as intercultural. However, the function of their interculturalism is actually interracial. It's not intercultural, meaning that the cultures of the people are not displayed in a diverse manner. However, their bodies are there. And there is this vision of assimilation or engrafting people, their cultures, their ways into a dominant vision, a dominant cultural vision, okay? So I pose a question to you, especially for those who are engaged in intercultural music participation. Is it precisely intercultural or is it interracial? And even when it is interracial, is the functioning of this mixture that you experience, is it assimilationist or is it really inclusive of many tongues, of the local or international holy days of the people that are a part of your community? Or is it the bodies that are present? Is it that there are visible representations and that's it? And I find often that folks who think they are intercultural are actually interracial, if that. And so as we take inventory about the quality or nature of our diversity, our equity, our inclusion, a term we like to use on college campuses, I also want to present that there are folks who are thinking critically about their participation in mixed settings. People are thinking about what I would call the sound of hegemony. Hegemony is this real fancy term many of us know that describes how power and dominance are promoted culturally. The hegemony is the dominant cultural group within a particular nation or setting. In this case, a European American identity would be described as a dominant ruling group. Then, secondly, by whose criteria has the mode of worship been determined? By whose criteria has the mode of worship been determined? Now here, it gets interesting because the Hymn Society would suggest a prizing of written traditions, right? But even today, we had some, in the moment of prayer that we had today, we had some oral transmission. So I love that though these songs were transcribed, they were initially transmitted through recordings, through the radio. Let the Church Say Amen is a popular song that we hear on the radio, and that might be the first encounter of the believer, and then they may come to it by the written tradition. As lovers of hymns, what are the ways in which the criteria for hymn participation is solely a written tradition? And what are the ways in which your community is open to oral transmission? Because that in and of itself is a highly sophisticated mode of sharing information. Now, in conservatory, I wasn't taught that. I was not taught that learning by ear, or as people say, by rote. I don't like that term by rote, because in some way I experience it as diminishing the tradition. But learning by ear, learning through hearing and then replicating or imitating or even placing your own signature, that is a sophisticated mode of sharing information, musical information, that I make it my business to let people understand the sophistication of it. And I just want to affirm that even in this organization, you guys are thinking about translating written traditions to oral transmission, and then vice versa. I love that. That's great. I know I'm in the right place. I also want us to reconsider worship music as a commodity, worship music that is offered for sale and then purchased. What does that mean? What does that transactional aspect mean for the quality of worship experiences that we are cultivating and preserving? So many faith traditions resist even recording or writing down the traditions, largely because they are orally transmitted. And they don't want anyone else to use their music apart from the practice. They don't want it to be ridiculed or assessed as though it is something apart from a revelation from God. And then lastly, how might we resituate the deployment of musical genre in worship? So here I would typically ask questions, and I see there's a lot in the chat. Let me just look. Okay, beyond the page, great. Often presenting something. Great, yes. Yeah, Charles Freeman, yes. It seems that decolonization in any endeavor inevitably has to involve decommodification as well. Awesome, I see you. Dolly Howe Packney, it's so good to see you in this forum. All right, great. Those who have just begun to, okay, I'm reading as I go. Okay, so I'll keep moving, you guys. All right, so let me hover over this oral transmission piece. So, you know, a lot of folks in this moment are thinking about their cultural relevance. And I think music ministry, I'm a music minister, I'm a preacher's kid who has been involved in international music ministry, raised in the Black church tradition, the academy of the church, raised also through concert music performance, went to conservatory. And through that variety of experiences, I've learned that there are various tools depending on the school of thought. Those who have learned El Sistema would know that there is a school of thought that is Spanish speaking that is wholly different than our conservatories here, or the Suzuki tradition, right? Well, I want to just talk about bringing the message to people in a language they recognize, in a tradition and presentation they recognize, especially as we wrestle with the anxieties about being appropriate as we use new hymns, new musical material in our worship. And sometimes it means the mode of transmission has to be altered, even if it is a hymn, okay? The mode of transmission. So though we know it is written, you might want to deliver it by ear because there are aspects of that musical tradition that are not transcribed or have not been transcribed properly. And I would actually assert that, especially in African American culture, is intentionally not transcribed so that you will learn it in relationship. Okay? I want you to put that in the chat. There are aspects of the culture that are not written so that you will learn it through relationship. Okay? There are aspects of the musical tradition that so that you will learn it through apprenticeship, through participation, through choir rehearsals. This is the sociality of music. This is moving to intercultural worship in a very genuine way, where you have sat with the conductor who only does it in a particular way, and they will give you that secret through that relationship. I often tell people, if you want to learn, particularly music of the Black church, you have to be in relationship with a practitioner. Doing it from the hymn alone, you are missing layers. And I'm going to show you some examples of how the layers can be missed. As a cultural bearer, as a person who works with various denominations, the Episcopal Church, the Methodists, Lutherans, and I give thanks that God has allowed me to operate in a versatile way. It was because it was modeled by practitioners like Evelyn Simpson Current and Richard Smallwood, Nolan Williams. These people modeled a versatility that I carry with me to this day. And what I've noticed is, as I engage various organizations, the anxiety that I see as people explore musics of other cultures is largely situated in this idea of performance practice. And for those unfamiliar with performance practice, it is a term we use as musicians. One might recall it being used, say, with Baroque music, for example, where there is an outline of the melody on the page, and then the person who specializes in the music has a sense of the flourish or ornamentation that they might apply to the melody that is within the tradition, and that it's expected for that performer to do so using their own signature style, that they put their own stamp on it. The same sort of expectation is there in African-American churches. Now, many Black practitioners do experience people venturing into Black musical traditions, especially those that are notated in hymns, as doing it willy-nilly. That is, doing flourish without a sense of their destination, harmonically or melodically. Hello, somebody. But if you're going to participate in improvisational practice, you have to have a sense of your beginning, your middle, and your end. That's just good writing. That's good worship leadership, okay? And so being in community, you get a sense of what that good beginning, middle, and end is. It's not just ornamentation for ornamentation's sake. There should be meaning conveyed through it. And you learn how to convey the meaning through relationship. Okay, I'm gonna look in the chat after this point that I'm about to make. So a concept I've developed is that oral music, or oral transmission in particular, is a technology. Oral transmission, oral music is a technology. For years in the United States, there was a huge debate about cultural retention. And I'll give you an example of that. There was this whole idea that since Africans arrived at these shores and have been among people of European ancestry since the 16th century, that there is no possible way they could have retained their own culture. And I'm sure many of you have heard that there's no possible way that they could have retained their language. Even though our wielding of language has been ridiculed, has been made fun of with terrible terms like Ebonics to describe African-American vernacular English, even though we have folk traditions that we know of musically, like the blues. People have actually written tons and tons trying to claim that Africans have not retained their culture since arriving to these shores. However, I argue through my concept of oral music or oral transmission as technology that the practice that was already in existence before enslavement, that the practice of oral tradition was a means by which music-centered data was encoded on the lives, the bodies, the spirits of African people. And it resembles what we see in other traditions, but it's crucial for understanding the humanity of people of African ancestry in the United States. And so to strip the oral transmission away is an undoing and is a threat to their humanity. To remove them from having those modes of musical intimacy is actually a theological error, I would argue. Now, what do I mean by it being a technology and data being transmitted through it? What I am saying here is I can give you one piece of musical information that has been transmitted orally, and we can build out an entire musical experience with that one download, that one piece of data. I could give you rhythm, and because of our shared memory, even in popular culture, here in the United States, we can all enter into a musical experience. And that is the core of the musical aesthetics for African Americans. Case in point, earlier this week, I was doing a lecture at Princeton Theological Seminary, and I did this exercise in the conventional Zoom platform where I could kind of see you all, but I'll just do it solo. And I'm sure some of you will participate. We believe in participatory worship and performance.
Do you want me to participate?
Listen, thank you, Brian. If I could see you, that would be great. Okay, real easy. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so if I were Brian to sing something like, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, what would you do? Yes! Yes, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy
and you know it,
and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Perfect. Good. So with that phrase, you automatically knew that it was an invitation to participate because of the literal lyrical information. But then I'm guessing you've heard this song before.
I have.
So you have a memory of what is expected.
Yes, very recent. I'm a 6-year-old.
I was about to say, everyone was like, oh, that is childhood. So it has been with me for quite some time. Well, in a similar manner, I can give just the rhythm, and people will know exactly how to jump in. They will know whether they can harmonize with me. They will know whether or not they can ad-lib. So you've proven my point. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. So that is an example of oral music as technology. And I have to go out of the keynote in order to see what you guys are saying. I just want to get a glance. Thank you for these great notes too. Yeah, there are aspects of, thank you, Noel Werner. Thank you. Different words. You know what? And that is a part of the beauty of oral transmission, where the regionalisms are taken into account. Because if I had more time, I would actually do what we call mic toss in the Black church tradition. The Kojic convention was recent, and they are known for the mic toss, where we toss the microphone, literally, and folks put their own spin on things. And there are actually variations on this particular song that is sung in the worship. If you're happy and you know it, say amen. So we vary it in that way for the worship experience. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. So there's even that. But then I was in another workshop, I sang that, and my brother from North Carolina had a more up-tempo, if you're happy, and I had never heard of it. So regionalisms are also a component of oral transmission within Black church traditions that is often overlooked by outsiders when they do just a cursory engagement. And when there's a cursory engagement, I'm just going to dispel any doubt when there's a cursory engagement, a superficial or shallow engagement, just know Dr. Jones is somewhere just going like this. Y'all are missing all the layers of meaning and beauty because there was no relationship. In relationship with someone like myself, I will tell you there's going to be variety, and you need to know your audience, your congregation as a worship leader. I love you too much to leave you ignorant of these things. So Kumbaya has been in the headlines as a way in which there's been a huge discourse about this particular song that is listed as a hymn in the African American Heritage Hymnal, for example. And I'm sure it's in many of your denominational supplements. But Kumbaya, there was a huge debate about who it belonged to, who this particular song belonged to. And it's a part of this large discussion about decolonizing worship, where now, because of work by people like myself, music researchers, musicologists, and ethnomusicologists, we have had to do forensic sort of research in the archives to unearth the early recordings of Kumbaya that attach it to the Gullah Geechee people of the southeastern seaboard. And this community, with its highly preserved tradition in language and in religious expression, is often a site we land on in order to talk about cultural retention that we've had to prove well into the 20th century, the late 20th century. And still people assert that Africans on these shores have not retained their culture. However, if you listen to the language of the Gullah Geechee people in the southeastern seaboard, you can trace it all the way back to the western seaboard of Africa. Kumbaya is one of the musical pieces of evidence that you might have even incorporated into your worship. And here I would say, in the same way that Brian opened up by acknowledging the indigeneity of where the conference is being held, I would encourage you, if you do use this song in worship, to tell people the story. That's another aspect of oral transmission, telling people the social and cultural context, that there was a fraught debate. And in many ways, this music was stolen from the people of the Gullah Geechee culture, and now it has been brought back with the understanding that it is a cultural treasure specific to our worship experiences here in the United States. Also, we're seeing in the news another important hymn. Now, it has been described variously as a hymn, an anthem, and there are scholars doing great research on Lift Every Voice and Sing by James Weldon Johnson, the brothers, James Weldon Johnson and J. Rosamond Johnson. James Weldon Johnson and J. Rosamond Johnson have given us so much in terms of literature and music and even commentary on the political climate through their involvement with the NAACP. It was James Weldon Johnson who coined the term the Red Summer 100 years ago, where, like this year, we saw a convergence of a pandemic, the Spanish flu, with the Red Summer that sprouted up all around the United States, like what we are seeing in terms of the tensions in the streets surrounding the movement for Black Lives or the Black Lives Matter movement. Similar sorts of issues and its history repeating itself. Lift Every Voice and Sing is an interesting case for us as we think about decolonizing worship, largely because in the news, we know that the NFL has proposed singing the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, or traditionally referred to as the Negro national anthem, for week one in the games of the NFL. Now here, some of you might have a little anxiety about the term Negro. I am of the mind, as with Black music researchers, music research colleagues, that the appropriate term for genres like Negro spirituals that might be included in your hymns is Negro spiritual, not spiritual. For one reason, Negro is a term that people still use to this day. Hence, Negro, the National Association of Colored People is another term that is dated that people still use to this day. I know of elders like grandparents who call themselves Negro. It is still a term that folks think of and don't feel ashamed about it. It's also the cataloging terminology. Negro spiritual, the Harry T. Burley anthology, you would find under Negro spiritual. And there's many reasons why categorically and period-wise, Negro spiritual is useful, and you should know the reasons why. So others might feel anxious when they hear you say it, but you should know how to explain that Negro was a way we referred to African Americans for a very long time. And there are people who still refer to themselves as Negro. There are songs that are classified as Negro spiritual. And I use a term in order to ascribe to the insider terminology. Spirituals can be an imprecise way because there are many types of spirituals. There are Appalachian spirituals. So yeah, precision. Lift every voice and sing is in your hymn books. However, there's a performance practice with them. And as we think about decolonizing worship, we can be married to the text and get our good culture through the text, or we can be in relationship with the artists, with the practitioners, to learn the way that it is actually invoiced in community. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to look in the chat. Thank you all for your engagement. And my fiance Calvin is helping me out to draw attention to some questions being posed. And I think for the Q&A, we're going to do the questions proper toward the end. Thank you, Carol King, for your question. We will address it. So yes, I see your remarks about Kumbaya. Yeah, oh, good question. Thank you, Calvin. Can largely white choirs sing Negro spirituals? Again, when you are in relationship and you bring in practitioners and you sit at their feet, it remedies some of these anxieties. Relationship and having folks who specialize in this will not only get you past the first layer of knowing the musical components, or at least the written components, but then also gesture, how movement and dance might be a part of the presumed participation in it. So if you want to do this sort of repertoire in predominantly white communities, hire somebody to come in, like any other musician, to workshop your choir and maintain and build on that relationship. And through that relationship, you have a culture bearer like myself, and there are plenty of people I could point you to regionally who are happy to walk alongside you and translate what it is you're trying to accomplish through the music. But hiring folks is also a form of ethical behavior, especially as we think of decolonizing, where so many of us as Black practitioners have responded to emails by our white colleagues for free, and have been poached and never saw the fruit of our labor. And right now we are really holding fast to the formal engagement of our intellectual property that has been ripped from us. A lot of these hymns that we even have were actually the fruit of collaboration between Black musicians and white people who understood how to transcribe. And because of our historical past, it was copywritten under white people. So that's a whole thing we could talk about as we think about decolonizing our worship. And what's this one? Yes. So I addressed the question about European communities. European style, I would ask, to what end would we incorporate a European style? Now, are you talking about the conversation around folk spirituals versus concertized spirituals, because concertized spirituals, scholars have done a lot of research to unpack the narrative of Fisk Jubilee singers and Mr. White's involvement in it, lifting up actually the unspoken labor of the students who actually had more musical training than Mr. White in that collaboration. And so there's been some miseducation and new scholarship by people like Sandra Graham, her new book on this topic. But Black scholars have been saying this for a long time. And concertized spirituals, whether they are transcribed in a hymnal or they are sung solo or in ensembles, it's actually a practice that was instituted by Roland Hayes at the turn of the century. Roland Hayes, many of you know, is a celebrated musical figure who was a tenor and who was a part of the Fisk Jubilee tradition. After his concerts, within his concerts, he would always include arranged compositions by Negro artists. And this same sort of tradition was adopted by people like Harry T. Burleigh, Marian Anderson, and Florence Price, whose works we are revisiting today. There's this whole renaissance around Florence Price's adoption of the folk spiritual. Marian Anderson, I've written about it. I have articles about it. But that practice of incorporating concertized spirituals has been what African Americans have done in order to get the language they recognize in their formal musical education and to connect with their audience and to sing the songs that their souls must have. Yes. Oh yeah, so Lift Every Voice. Let me make sure I wrap up everything with Lift Every Voice, because Lift Every Voice, and here, Brian, I want the folks to hear a setting of Lift Every Voice, if that's okay, or if not, I can point you to a recording of it. Okay, good. So thank you for bringing me back to that. Lift Every Voice and Sing can be understood as having the ABA sorts of form. But Roland Carter's setting, we refer to it as an arranged composition, a concert composition. That is one of the popular settings or variations on this particular song. There's also the setting that if you were to use the hymnal in performance practice, there are fermate that are used. So in the portion where you go, for example, facing the rising sun, it's understood to be held. Sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. And every iteration at that moment, that fermata is understood to be held. It may not be notated, but it is understood to be held. And the entrance back into tempo can be rubato, depending on who is at the piano or who is the lead singer as it is being performed.
And Dr. Jones, we sang this yesterday during morning prayer. Felicia and a choir from our Lovelace scholars, who are our student scholarship participants, did a virtual choir, and Ryland A. Harris was the accompanist. Just so you know.
Love it. See, thank you for telling me that, because Felicia's one of my students, so that just lets me know she's doing the good work.
She's doing the work.
She's doing the good work. Yes, yes. And so I can recall even recently, I went to a symposium for Black music researchers at University of Michigan. And for those of you who are concert music buffs, George Shirley was among us singing. He is a famous operatic tenor. And the collection of us, it was maybe, I'll say 50 of us, to seal the moment as is tradition for us in many of our auspicious occasions, whether it's a football game, a basketball game, and at many HBCUs, you can hear this song often in lieu of the U.S. national anthem. We got up and sang to the front of what might be a lecture hall. We all got up to finish the event, and he was the person setting the tempo. We sang for only the audience of one. And it was one of the most beautiful, moving experiences because us as concert musicians were able to sing collectively a song of our culture the way we were taught it, without any fanfare from folks and their applause. And it was one of the most beautiful moments, but it illustrated how there's a whole tradition that is known to those who are practitioners of Black church culture. Brian, I want to check, I think I'm at time or maybe a little over time. Should I go to question or should I play this and then go to questions?
Why don't we play it and then go to questions?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you guys for your patience. I'm going to switch screens to play for you a rendition, a very popular concert rendition. And I'm switching screens, okay. And it's significant because the person conducting it is the composer of the arranged composition. And I intentionally use the term arranged composition to denote that to arrange a piece is an entire cultural, an entire and complete practice. It is understood as being sophisticated. And as you'll hear, this is a through composed work. And I encourage you to enjoy. It's so funny. My fiance was on the campaign trail last year, and one of his constituents had discovered this particular rendition and was just blown away by Dr. Roland Carter's interpretation. And I was so happy to share with that person that this is the music of my DC public school youth. This is one of the great gifts that system gave me. Lift Every Voice and Sing, both the traditional and the arranged composition by Roland Carter. Okay, sharing screen now. All right. So I'm sure you can get a sense of why I wanted to share this arranged composition with you. I see the commentary in the chat. I do want to say that I've reviewed Dr. Graham's work, and there are some really new pieces of research that are coming out by scholars such as Dr. Matthew Morrison, Dr. Marty Newland, Dr. Katrina Thompson on the Negro spiritual that are newer insights on the tradition. Her book was released about 2 years ago. And I have a book review I could share with you guys. If you check out academia.edu, it should be there. Or you can find it through, I believe, the Journal of Pop Music. but so many people have written about the inequity of attribution with regard to Mr. George White and his students in terms of how we understand that tradition being developed. I will pause here. I see some really cool questions about commodity, but if we can't finish it here, I can give you my email address, my website, whatever.
I was going to say, I think we do have time for one question, and I was looking through them, and I agree. I think the theme of most of the questions deals with the commodification and the industry with copyrights and finances and how all that kind of interacts.
Yeah. Yeah, so Matthew Morrison is who I think of here, who just released an article in the JAMS journal. Many of you might know JAMS is one of the major musicological journals, and he's been dealing with copyright head on. And he has really shown how Black cultural products, in this case music, have been harvested, if you will, and detached from the originators, copywritten, and people have actually made cases for getting their royalties for products that have been developed. And because of all of the tape, red tape, many of them were exploited. So Matthew Morrison would be someone I would point you to out of NYU who could give you a really thorough look into it. And we know when we just look at copyright in the United States, people of African ancestry were barred from copywriting their materials nationally well into the 20th century. And because of that legacy, and many other cultures deal with this sort of looking back to look forward, as we deal with a capitalistic society, a society where we must pay in order to have various services, my advice to you in doing the good work of decolonizing is when you engage folks for their ideas, cite them, allow them to be present as their ideas are engaged, whether that is through invited opportunities or using their research and citing them, saying their names. Simple gestures like promoting people's names from footnotes to the bodies of your research and your bulletins. I would also say use African-American women. In the longer version of this, I use a piece by Anita Watkins Stevens. It's my pleasure to use her. But engaging performance practice within the Black church is really understood to be done well in relationship and making sure that you properly engage folk in a professional manner. Drive-by consultations, it's just unethical and it's tiresome. I can't tell you how many emails I get from colleagues who didn't want to do the coursework, didn't want to look up the materials, actually cautioned me that doing Black sacred music research was not a thing. How they ask outright for my bibliographies and syllabi that took me so long to develop and make credible. And so when you want those sorts of consultations about performance or content, do so with the expectation or the offering of making sure that that person is made whole. Even in this commoditized arrangement. And people will continue to answer your calls. There's so much I could say. You guys, I'm doing workshops in August, if I could share about that, Brian.
Of course.
If you guys want to continue this, but I'm passionate about intercultural engagement. I'm doing a webinar entitled Liberation Through Music next month because I get a lot of these questions. And I like to walk alongside people. I love training music ministers to be culturally aware, competent, and asking the right questions because the spirit demands it. And I also have a book out that engages some of these concepts with regard to Black male performance and I believe my fiance has posted the information for you all. Let's shout out Calvin Taylor Skinner. Let's give God a praise for him for being so helpful this morning. And thank you, Brian, for giving me the liberty to stretch. There's so much there. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share so much.
No, thank you for being here. And Hymn Society, send your love and energy and gratefulness to Dr. Jones. I hope you can feel it coming from all over the world. We've got registrants from pretty much every continent. And we'll be archiving this for folks who missed it live. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Hymn Society, remember our noon featured sessions will start at noon Eastern, which is in about 40 minutes, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Stay in touch. Thank you.